A very warm welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of Africa Today, our show bringing you all the latest news and events happening all around the African continent. My name is Angie Maher and I'll be joining you for today's edition. As usual, we'll begin straight away with a look at some of the news making our headlines, where Cairo said it is continuing to do its best to support lasting peace and stability in the African continent. This came as Africa Week was held under the theme towards repositioning post-conflict reconstruction and development in Africa. We have more details in this report.
African Union marked the AU Week on Monday, themed towards repositioning post-conflict reconstruction and development in Africa. In a video conference marking the event, Sisi urged all international partners to keep exerting efforts to help create a better future for Africa. He said this second edition of the AU's week sheds light on attention paid by all parties to the issues of development and reconstruction in Africa. The week's activities coincide with several challenges and crises taking place at both regional and international levels. He said such challenges underline the need to strengthen joint efforts on supporting national institutions, the principles of good governance, and means to guarantee lasting peace and resolving and avoiding conflicts in the region. He said Cairo prioritizes such issues as evidenced by its hosting of the activities of the African Union Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development, PCRD, to support stability in Africa. He said Cairo continues to exert all efforts to support lasting peace and stability in Africa in coordination with presidents and heads of government of African countries to realize the goals of the Agenda 2063, which he said aims to achieve inclusive and sustainable socio-economic development over a 50-year period in Africa.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by His Excellency Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. It's a very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, thank you, sir, and thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And let me start by asking you about the African Union Week, which kick-started on Monday. And this year round, it is themed towards repositioning post-conflict reconstruction and development in Africa. How do you see the importance of this theme, and what fields do you see need swift action in this regard, Mr. Ambassador?
Very important, because after all, we are African. We are one of the largest African countries, one of the most powerful economies in Africa. Same time, we are represented in every single country in Africa by embassies, and we are covering the whole continent, so we know exactly what's going on.
Yes.
And we are very accepted face to the African, because we have long history to share with, starting from the Pharaonic period. And I visited many African countries where the king of Swaziland put in his booklet that he is proud that he is coming from Pharaonic origin. Same thing, you will find it in Cameroon on the west side of Africa. So they look to us because we help them. We have share history against the occupation of foreign forces. Now we are sharing the same the future of the African Union, and we are present also by our experts everywhere, whether doctors or teachers or name it. And frankly, we have to enlarge this sort of cooperation, because it is very good but not good enough. Africa needs more and more of our cooperation. Al-Azhar al-Sharif is hosting tens of thousands of African students learning in Al-Azhar, and our universities also. So we have a long history to go together for the future. And I am happy that since our President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi came to power, he became very interested in tackling the problems of Africa. He visited many African countries. He became the chairman of the African Union in 2019. We represented Africa in the Security Council for a couple of years. So we now give all the attention to our continent, because it deserves, and it will pay back, if you want to say. And our trade also is jumping, developing, and the last figures announced by our authorities that we are almost triple our trade with Africa, with a surplus for our favor in the trade balances. So all these points are positive and encourages us to continue supporting Africa and cooperate with all the African countries.
Absolutely. Mr. Ambassador, Cairo said it is always doing, its best to support lasting peace and stability in the African continent. How do you see the recent international developments, whether it's, post-COVID pandemic or the Russian-Ukrainian war, really affecting, stability in the African continent? And how do you see Egypt working towards regaining that stability?
Of course, as you well know, we have two international headaches. First, it was the coronavirus, which stopped many activities, and it affected badly our economies, whether it is tourism or transport or many activities. The second is the war in Ukraine.
Yes.
But I must say honestly that Africa is suffering from this. But Africa is suffering most from its internal problems, because Africa, after all, is suffering from something we are not aware about it, the tribes and parties. If you ask an African from where you are, he will never mention his country, he will mention his tribe. And this is dangerous, because the slogan in Africa we are trying to support. It is good bless the country, not the tribe. So under one flag, we need every African country to live under one flag, under one dependent country. And this is a real severe problem, because they are fighting each other in the same country in order to dominate the situation. This is much worse than the corona disease or the Ukrainian war.
Indeed. Mr. Ambassador, as Egypt is always keen to forward, the interests of African nations, how do you see the United Nations Climate Conference working in this regard and really addressing African countries' needs?
It was a very good occasion to present the African case.
Yes.
Because really, as you well know, Africa is suffering from unfair treatment. And always I am telling our colleagues from the diplomacy of the Western countries that it is unfair that the flow of money coming out of Africa to the developed countries is much more than it receives. It pays its debts, it pays its invoice of imports more than it exports or receives investment. And this cannot continue for a long time. So we have to present our case that we want those wealthy countries to come to invest in Africa with the Egyptian experience on the African soil. And we are well received here in Japan, in China, and in the European Union.
Indeed. Now, the African continent has also come, a long way to improve intra-African relations, improve trade exchange between different countries. They've reached several agreements under the African Union. How important do you see these steps? As Your Excellency said before, African countries have great potential.
Yes, this is a very good point also, because living in Africa, you will realize that they need many things which we are producing. They need also technical assistance. They need many things. But we have our internal problems in Africa that you don't have, for instance, a banking system from high degree. You don't have transport. Airway traffic is not covering all the continent. Road traffic also. Maritime, most of the African ports cannot receive big ships. Many details. And among all of this, the bureaucracy is killing any investor who wants to come in Africa to invest. So we have to tackle all these problems, and we are for it. Whatever it takes, we shall do it.
Indeed. Your Excellency, another issue that was discussed in detail during the COP27 was the green energy transmission, the green energy in general. How important do you see this, and how could it impact African economies if they were to transition to such a kind of energy?
Now we are doing our best in order to make Africa able to export more and more, and we are working on the sector of energy. We are building a big dam in Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, by Egyptian companies. We are financing many projects to explore electricity here and there. And we are in a position now in Egypt to export African electricity and African oil to Europe. And we are building now a pipeline between Egypt and both Greece and Cyprus, and an electricity line also to export our electricity. We need to do that. Same time, we need to establish small and medium-sized industries for food industry in Africa. It's a big future if we start to do it. So the sky is the limit there, but it depends on our efforts, and it depends also that we do not have all the means we need. So we need good financiers in order to continue this process.
And Your Excellency, how do you see the role of the international community with regards to African countries, whether it's with financial assistance, technological transfer? How important of a role do you think they can play even as investors in African countries?
I must say it is good, but not good enough, because Africa is very far. If you ask any European where to go this summer, he wouldn't mention any African country. So it is easier to go to Europe, it is easier to go to the Americas or even Latin America. Africa still need to continue sort of information process for the whole world to see how it is good and useful to come and invest in the continent. We have a long way to go in this concern.
And what needs to be done by African nations, African governments, in order to encourage this, Your Excellency?
We need to make ourselves better. We need to make our investors feel that he will benefit from coming to our countries. Because I must tell you frankly that even in Egypt, we have some people who are against foreigners or against those who are investing, thinking that we can invest by ourselves and we can finance all what we need. No, this is not true. The truth is that we need at least half of our aim of investment coming from abroad, whether from the Arab world, from our Egyptians living abroad, and from the United States and Europe and China and Japan.
Yes, and the diversification of possible investors is also very important for the African continent, not just to rely on a specific country that, you know, overtakes investment opportunities in the continent.
Yes, also on the same time, Africa has many things which we need. I remember I tried to import wood and timber from Africa. I couldn't. Why? Because it is dominated by European companies. You cannot buy it. If you want to have timber from any African countries, you have to go and cut the wood yourself, and you export it from there. It is a slightly complicated problem. That's why I raise the slogan, if you want to trade with Africa, you have to start investing in Africa.
Absolutely. And on that very positive slogan, I'd like to thank you very, very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Gamal Bayoumidi, former assistant to the Foreign Minister. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and for your insight and for joining us on today's edition of Africa Today. And still continuing with more news coming away from the African continent, Sudan and the International Monetary Fund have reached an emergency financing agreement. The deal is over the release of about $112.7 million in emergency financing. More details in this report.
The International Monetary Fund and South Sudan have reached a staff-level agreement for the release of about $112.7 million in emergency financing. The fund said on Tuesday that this emergency financing under the new food shock window will help South Sudan address food insecurity, support social spending, and boost international reserves. The IMF's executive board will approve the financing in coming weeks. In early November, UN agencies said up to 7.8 million people in South Sudan, 2/3 of the population, may face severe food shortages during next year's April to July lean season due to floods, drought, and conflict. On Tuesday, the IMF put the number of people experiencing severe food shortages at hundreds of thousands in the country. South Sudan erupted into civil war shortly after seceding from Sudan in 2011, and while a peace agreement signed 4 years ago is largely holding, the transitional government has been slow to unify various military factions.
And our final news item comes from Equatorial Guinea, where the veteran ruler Teodoro Obiang Nguema has taken the lead in the West African country's presidential race, according to provisional results that were released by the Ministry of Interior. More details to follow.
Equatorial Guinea's veteran ruler Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo is all but certain of winning a record 6th term in a country with next to no opposition. The 80-year-old leader has been in power for more than 43 years, the longest of any head of state alive today, excluding monarchs. Voters took to the polls on Sunday, and Obiang has so far won 44.2% of votes cast in nearly half the country's polling stations. Andres Isono Ondo from the only tolerated opposition party, the Convergence for Social Democracy, was trailing far behind with a 1.34% share. Buenaventura Monsoy Asumo of the Social Democratic Coalition Party, a historic ally of the president's party, was even further back with 0.35%. The final results are set to be announced Saturday. Obiang appears set for victory with the backing of a coalition of 15 parties, including his all-powerful ruling Democratic Party of Equatorial Guinea. The party was the country's only legal political movement until 1991. It holds 99 of the 100 seats in the outgoing National Assembly and all 70 Senate seats. At the last presidential election in 2016, Obiang was re-elected with 93.7% of the vote. Obiang seized power in August 1979, toppling his uncle Francisco Macayas Nguema, who was then executed by firing squad.
With this final news item, we wrap up today's edition of Africa Today. We do hope you have enjoyed it. Join us again tomorrow for a new edition with a new crew. Till then, you're in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Thank you for watching.